Welcome to the July edition of the Takoma Coffee House, where journalists Eleanor Clift and Tom Brzaitis will drop by Writer's Block to discuss their book on how the Washington game is played. Midwife Carolyn Dutcher on the ins and outs of birth control, that's on In Sickness and in Health. Also, author Mark Hertsgaard argues it's time to slam the brakes on the automobile culture. That's coming up on Coffee House Forum. Drown those lazy, hazy dog days of summer, Hunter Williams offers his recipe for homebrewed beer, while Bruce Hutton plays the mouthbow, the fretless banjo, and the national steel guitar on musical traditions, plus poetry by Rose Solari, and Howard Cohn's new appreciation for body and soul. Our sports guy describes his recent stroke and the road back. But first, the news.
Hi, I'm Eric Bond.
And I'm Lisa Page, and we've got the news.
July 1st was reunification time for China and Hong Kong and for the Montgomery and Prince George's sections of Takoma Park. On a hot and humid July night, 19 years after Sam Abbott introduced the idea of a united city in his 1978 mayoral bid, Takoma Park celebrated the end of its divisions between Prince George's and Montgomery counties with good humor and hard political analysis. In a multimedia extravaganza at the Municipal Building, scripted by Councilmember Larry Rubin, citizen activists and current and former officials celebrated with 200 residents what had often been dismissed as an impossible dream. Among the early unification pioneers was attorney Tom Gagliardo, who still seems stunned by the passage of the unification bill 3 years ago in Annapolis.
When Sam Abbott in 1978 decided he was going to run for mayor, and I learned of that fact about 15 feet from here, right outside that door. He said, "I'm going to run for mayor." Now, I've left two words out. He said, blank, blank, I'm going to run for mayor. And I have three planks to my platform. An end to double taxation, which is now largely a reality. More zoning power for the city, which is a little bit better than it used to be. And the unification of our city into one county. And I said, Sam, it's a great idea, but never in a million years are we going to get the whole city in one county. And I'm here tonight to announce the obvious fact. I was only wrong by 999,981 years. It took 19 years, but it happened, and here we are.
That was Tom Gagliardo. Peter Franchot, the unification bill sponsor, was one of the many speakers who praised the late Takoma Park Mayor Sam Abbott for his passion and leadership, if not for his diplomacy.
And Lynn Bradley, who is not with us, but I don't think she was on the city council then, but she was a big activist in this issue, went down and told me that when she went into the packed hearing room, she sat down next to a very nice-looking gentleman who said, "Do you think you could point Sam Abbott out to me?" And she said, "Yes, he's a couple of rows up and over a little bit." And he then said, "Why are you down here?" And she said, "Well, we're here for the unification issue." And she proceeded to talk about how great unification was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally she turned to him and said, "And who are you?" He said, "I'm from the state police, and I'm here to keep an eye on Sam Abbott."
That was Delegate Peter Franchot. State Senator Art Dorman claimed that Senate President and fellow Prince Georgian Mike Miller dropped his opposition to unification as a favor to him. But speaking next, Senator Ida Rubin, who chairs the Montgomery County delegation, suggested a trade involving support for a bill favored by Miller's candidate for county executive was a more likely reason. Certainly a key component in the 1994 victory was the support of the Prince George's County Council, led by Councilmember Steve Del Giudice, a former mayor of Takoma Park. Del Giudice, who now lives outside of Takoma Park, brought a moment of melancholy to the proceedings as he publicly recognized that he would no longer represent his former neighbors in Takoma Park.
First, let me say that it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm going to make one personal observation. Today is a day that I welcome with a great deal of joy, but with some melancholy. My political career began very early in Takoma Park as an ordinary citizen working in groups like Citizens for Referendum. But I first held elected office in 1985. Today is the first time in my political career as an elected official that I do not represent you. I welcome that because it's what the city deserves and what the city needs, but I do so with some loss.
Steve Del Giudice. The evening was capped off with the symbolic cutting of the boundary line through Takoma Park by Montgomery County officials and the mayor.
People said the Berlin Wall would fall before Takoma Park was united, and that's correct. That's what happened.
And Hong Kong went back to China.
Yeah, let's film it.
Should we all want one? We're trying to do a photo op here. Who's gonna cut it? Put all hands on it. All the hands. All the hands. All hands. All hands. All hands. Wait for the music.
Wait for the music.
Montgomery County Councilmember Derrick Berlage welcomed Takoma Park into the county.
Whereas the Montgomery County Council enthusiastically welcomes the former residents of Prince George's County in the city of Takoma Park to Montgomery County, now therefore be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County proclaims today, July 1st, 1997, as Takoma Park Unification Day. It's official.
I think a good, important point to be made to the Montgomery County Council and to the county executive is what Derrick just said. We do know how to organize, and we do know how to have our voices heard. So let that be a warning to you. I have.
One of the first opportunities for Takoma Park to express its newly unified voice came at a Board of Education public hearing on Wednesday, July 2nd, at the current Blair High School on Wayne Avenue. The unification of Takoma Park adds approximately 400 students to local classrooms, and efforts to find space for these students, as well as address the escalating overcrowding in other neighborhood schools, has kept parent activists and school officials busy for the past 2 years. According to PTA activists, 2 solutions are available. The first is to renovate the old Blair on Wayne into both an elementary school and a middle school. The second possibility is to add new classrooms to existing schools elsewhere in the cluster. Plans to build a new school on the eastern edge of the city have fallen through because of lack of a proper site. Last week, Superintendent Paul Vance adopted the Wayne Avenue option in accordance with community recommendations. Board approval is necessary before the proposal moves on to the County Council. Until a long-term solution is in place, former Prince George's students will attend Takoma Park Elementary for kindergarten through 2nd grade and Pinecrest Elementary for 3rd through 5th grades.
After 14 years, the city of Takoma Park is leaving the produce business and is darned happy about it. Sometime this summer, a 7-member board of directors will take over the Laurel Avenue Sunday Farm Market, which to many residents is as much a meeting place as a market. The city's community planner, Vanita George, said the city is especially pleased to discontinue the many staffing hours that go into processing applications, monitoring violations, and advertising the weekly event. According to George, quote, "The vendors want to manage their own market. They're committed to their cause, and outsiders see it differently than the person tilling the land and kneading the bread." The farm market has become a hot topic of discussion on the Takoma Voice electronic list recently, as a few residents called for changes: an earlier opening, enlarging the market by adding the parking lot on Carroll, and lower prices, even if that means letting farmers sell produce other than their own. Some grumbled about $1 tomatoes or tiny lavender plants selling for $1.75. The city is not completely shutting the barn door on the farmer market, so to speak. George said that it will always take the market back if it becomes, quote, too much for the vendors.
Apartment dwellers at 7057 Carroll Avenue are still steaming after a next-door landlord's efforts at landscaping resulted in a nasty stench and what one resident called a festering swamp. Ironically, the house on Carroll Avenue, now owned by Michael Belli, was earlier home to Green Goods, an environmental retail store. One day, in early spring of this year, neighbor Dorothy Gracie looked out her window and found that the foliage next door had been replaced by a mountain of drywall and rubble, crowned with a toilet bowl and seats. When neighbors complained, Belli smashed up the toilet and covered the whole mound with a layer of dirt. which neighbor Gracie described as malodorous. Then the city moved into action. It seems that a white cedar remained in the backyard, and the recent efforts at landscaping threatened its life. Mark Busciano, the city arborist, demanded that Belly save the tree. Belly submitted a plan, but no action was taken. Meanwhile, spring rains had made the pile of non-absorbent dirt, in one observer's words, quote, a grotesque quagmire. The white cedar began rotting in the standing water, and landlord Belly dug a drainage ditch and treated the water with bleach to reduce the odor. The city fined Belly, required him to remove the earth, and told him to vertical mulch, which involves digging holes to aerate the soil. The fate of the old oak tree is still not certain, despite the city's best efforts, however. The city's Busciano said that it will not, quote, usually show symptoms that it's dying for 1 to 7 years.
Looks like Ed Sharp will face an electoral challenge this year. Activist Rudy Arredondo is the first citizen to declare his candidacy for Takoma Park mayor. Arredondo made his announcement on Sunday, May 31st at El Gavilan restaurant on Flower Avenue. Arredondo says that he will emphasize the connection between government and the community during the campaign. Quote, although there is an appearance of unity, said Arredondo, we really are kind of distant from the city government. I want to see more integration between the government and different groups. Arredondo has a strong background in social action. Born into a family of migrant workers, Arredondo has been involved in many struggles for worker empowerment, including justice for janitors. Arredondo came to this region in 1974 to work for the Migrant Legal Action Program. A Takoma Park resident since 1978, Arredondo was one of the founders of the Takoma Park Folk Festival and helped create the Democratic Hispanic Club of Montgomery County and the Montgomery County chapter of the League for Latin American Citizens, or LULAC. For the record, Mayor Ed Sharp says that he has not yet decided whether or not he will run again.
On another note, Takoma Coffee House introduces a new feature that includes, courtesy of Chuck and Dave's bookstore and Video Americain, a list of the top videos and top best-selling books that Takoma Park is reading. As featured in the Takoma Voice, the list includes the top 10 bestsellers, with Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes as the #1 top-selling book. It's a memoir about his childhood in Ireland. Also, Takoma Park writer Linda Stern's book, Money Market Secrets for the Self-Employed, is at #5. And my personal favorite, The Color of Water by James McBride, is at #8. It's also a memoir.
Surprising to me, the top video in Takoma Park last month was Jerry Maguire. I haven't seen the film, but Lisa tells me that it's the bomb, so I'm going to have to rent it this weekend if I can find a copy. #2 was the new thriller parody Scream, followed by First Amendment drama The People vs. Larry Flynt. #4 in June was Fargo, which also happens to be the best-selling video of all time at Video Americain. The 5th video, Il Postino, also happens to be the second best renter of all time at Video Americain. Other best renting videos are Marvin's Room, Ransom, Flirting with Disaster, Emma, and Big Night. And that's the news. I'm Eric Bond.
And I'm Lisa Page. It was 7 a.m. the morning of June 3rd, a morning our Howard Kohn isn't apt to forget.
Well, this is one of those good news, bad news stories. The bad news was that I woke up with a headache. The good news is that I got to the hospital in time. Actually, my symptoms were not so bad. I had a headache and nausea, but I could function. It was more like having the flu. And I took my daughter to school and took Diana, my wife, to a meeting. And then she came back and took our son down to the bus stop. And she was on her way to work, and I was on my way back to bed, thinking that I would just curl up and throw up and it would be all over in a while. But I have to say, an agent of a higher power put a message down to me saying, "You're having a stroke, go to the hospital." And I listened. I went, I got in the car, picked up my wife at the bus stop, and we went to the hospital, which turned out to be very fortuitous because I got into a CAT scan and they found out that I was that I had a cerebral hemorrhage in the back, and just after that, a second hemorrhage began, which was much worse than the first, and I was heading straight for a coma and probably worse, but by that time they had medication on the way, and they hooked me up to an IV, and I made it. Well, I have to mention surgery 48 hours later, it's a fairly long stay at the hospital, but I made it back. I'm supposed to be 80% in 6 weeks, and 90% in 6 months, and 100% in a year. And I'm supposed to be back to 100%. I passed all the mental and physical tests, and no damage, they say. The surgery was 6.5 hours. It resulted in a 12.5-inch scar here, most of it hid by my hair, what's left of my hair. But it was well, I don't remember much of the surgery, except that my head hurt a lot afterwards. I'm not quite up to hosting Body and Soul for this edition, but there's a substantially impressive replacement for me tonight, a primer on how to brew your own beer. Stay tuned.
Brewing a batch of beer involves 3 major events over a 2-week period. In this video, we'll take a quick look at each one. First, the boil. Second, the transfer. And third, bottling.
Kind of equivalent things. These are both malt. This one's the powder. This is 3 pounds, and this is 3 kilograms, so it's about twice as much. But usually you have a base of the malt extract, and then you might use powder to supplement that. The other main ingredients are water, biggest ingredient, and these are pellets. Hop pellets. Hop is the main thing that gives it a bitter or flowery flavor, depending on how long you leave them in the boil. The longer you leave them in, the more bitterness it gets out, brings out. Yeast, this is a more effective yeast, it's a liquid yeast, and it's all expanded because it's already fermenting in there. We popped this yesterday, middle of the day. It starts as a flat package, and then you break open the inside seal, and then it starts fermenting, and so it's already active when you pour it in. And this doesn't actually go in until the beer is already in the fermentation bucket and down to room temperature, and then you pour the yeast in. Probably about ready. Yeah, the water's boiling. So we can open the malt and pour it in.
Oh. Wow. This is very satisfying. Yeah.
It's a good can.
Yeah, the whole house smells very good.
Powder going in. Nice, that's really sitting up high.
Yeah, you just gotta boil over.
First it's gonna blow on it before it does that. And blow it.
Here I'm tossing in an ounce of hop pellets. These are going in early in the boil and are called bittering hops. The longer hops stay in the boil, the more bitterness you get out of them.
So this is really the tea part. Actually, this isn't a very complicated brew, but you can have bags of stuff where you just rest in there. Bags of grains and things.
Total.
Whoa, smell those already.
Cool. Yeah, those should cook for about 2 minutes, and then you can turn the heat off and just let them soak in there.
These hop pellets are going in late in the boil, and they're called aroma hops. They're used to give beer a hoppy or flowery flavor.
Fermentation bucket that the beer is going to sit in for 1 week, and then it gets transferred to a glass carboy, which is more sterile. But this is really better for the heavy fermentation period when things are really active and there's not as much danger of contamination at that point. So we're going to pour this in here, and then once this gets down to room temperature, then we'll add the yeast. Can you see this black spot in here? This is mold or some kind of mildew that's grown up in this tube in the last couple of months. So that's one reason you need to sterilize it. You actually have stuff living in there during the off season. But mainly, I actually don't have to use that tube today. I just want to get a head start on it for when I do. But I need to sterilize the fermentation bucket and the siphon through which we're going to pour the beer, and the fermentation lock, which is what's going to sit on top of the bucket. Sterilizing is the most important part of brewing, everyone says. But no one ever shows it to you.
Why is that?
Why is it important, or
why is it the most important?
Because otherwise you'll have unwanted creatures growing in your beer that'll turn the flavors, or worse, poison you.
Significant.
This is straining out all the hop leavings here.
On that algae, how do you look at that?
Algae, yeah. This is even more important when you use hop leaves as opposed to hop pellets, because then you really have a lot of stuff on top. And it's starting to...
Anything recently that I'm going back to listen to Lounge Lizards.
Aerate the beer. We normally like to do when we first put it in, because I forgot.
After 1 week in the fermentation bucket, you transfer the beer to the glass carboy, where it will sit for another week. The trickiest part of the transfer is getting a proper siphon tube going between the bucket and the carboy. But once you've got that going, you pretty much just sit around and watch it flow. Washer that you can buy at a beer store. Screws onto your faucet here, and this water's on. When you push the lever down, it squirts water up into the bottle, making a nice restaurant-style bottle washer.
Particularly stressful job, or is there a reason that you're taking a swig of vodka?
The sterilizing technique.
Ah, I've heard that one before. Old crazy Uncle Eddie, he was always sterilizing.
Big tip.
Capper, caps it very tight. Tip it upside down. 100 bottles of beer on the wall, 100 bottles of beer. Go down, passing around, 100 bottles of beer on the wall.
You can find more about homebrewing with Hunter on the World Wide Web. Coming up, midwife Carolyn Dutcher talks contraception on In Sickness and in Health.
Hi, and welcome to In Sickness and Health. I'm Cathy Kristiansen. The pill may have ushered in the sexual revolution, but birth control is nothing new. Women of antiquity monitored their monthly cycles to exercise some control over pregnancy. Egyptian women of old even went so far as to consume lead to prevent unwanted babies. Today we have a choice of more than 12 forms of contraception, but some people say the options still aren't good enough. Here to talk about the pros and cons of various pregnancy prevention methods and what's new in research is Carolyn Dutcher from the Women's Health Center in Takoma. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Contraception is used for preventing unwanted pregnancies, but various forms of it can also have important health benefits. Would you like to talk a little bit about those?
Yes, I think probably the most accepted prevention is against sexually transmitted infection, and that's certainly very important in this day and age. Other benefits might be to just lighten someone's menstrual periods or to prevent certain types of cancer, as it is with the use of the oral contraceptive pill. And as you mentioned, the prevention of pregnancy, which seems obvious, but pregnancy itself has health risks. So there is a benefit besides just preventing the pregnancy, in that someone who has a medical condition could have serious consequences if they got pregnant unintended.
We're going to talk about the various forms in a minute, but you mentioned that certain contraceptions can prevent cancers.
Yes.
Just this week there was a study that showed that taking the pill actually helps prevent the cancer-causing gene that causes ovarian cancer. So that would seem to be extremely important.
Right, right.
We have some stills showing the various forms of contraceptives.
Okay.
They're coming up right now, and perhaps you can explain the pros and cons of each, because I believe none of them are totally satisfactory for any one type.
Every method has pros and cons, I think, and I think that probably as you get toward methods that have better protection rates, then you have more potential side effects, so that things that are systemic, like oral contraceptives or Norplant or Depo-Provera, will have more side effects, whereas the things like condoms or spermicides are very straightforward, but they may not be as effective. And unfortunately, people don't have the best of both worlds sometimes, so they use a different method at different times in their life.
Could you perhaps start explaining, we don't have that video yet, but we will in a minute, for instance, the female barrier methods that exist?
The female barrier methods certainly are some of the longer known products. The diaphragm, the cervical cap, which is a little bit newer to some people, are two barrier methods. And there's actually a female condom now that's available that some people may not be familiar with, but is very similar actually to the male condom, except that it fits inside the woman's vagina and then offers protection both against pregnancy and also against sexually transmitted infection.
Here we have a selection of a few of them. If you could explain what we have in the picture.
Sure. You can see the diaphragm there. Also, there's the box with the female condom, and it doesn't give you a very good picture yet, but as I said, it's like a large condom. There's a cervical cap, a couple of different sizes. And there's also a package of contraceptive film, which is actually more of a spermicide itself rather than a barrier.
See, and I think we're coming on to another video. The next one we're going to show is the IUD.
Yes, and the IUD is a device that would be implanted or put inside the uterus, can be used for up to 10 years in time, and offers good protection, although, as many people are aware, it does have a history of being associated with infection in the uterus. So we don't recommend it for people unless they're very exclusive and have only one partner.
And this infection can lead to sterility.
Yes, it can.
And
Yes.
apart from a great deal of pain.
Right, and this is another type of IUD, which is actually just a 1-year IUD, the Progestacert.
We have another one. How much would something like that cost?
The IUD itself is approximately $100, and then the insertion, there's a fee for that, so it's over $300 to have an IUD inserted in some private offices. It's about $200 in a Planned Parenthood clinic.
And how long would it be valid for?
10 years for the Paragard, which is the copper one that was first shown, and then 1 year for the Progestacert.
Here we have some.
And these are the oral contraceptive pills, some of them, and there's many brands of different oral contraceptives, some new ones that are coming out that are very low dose and that are beneficial for reducing the side effects. And the Depo-Provera booklet that's showing in the background is about an injection that women use once every 3 months. It's progesterone only, no estrogen, and is very good protection, although it does have some side effects, the most common being irregular bleeding.
I think perhaps you'd like to show you have a female condom here, since it was in the box. It doesn't give anyone an idea.
Sure. This is a package of 3. I think the price is about $7 in the pharmacy, and the woman puts it in herself. It's a one-time use, and then she discards it. And as I said, it's like a large condom in the sense that it's a latex tube. This inserts like a diaphragm, and then this fits on the outside. So it offers protection both, like I said, against the pregnancy as well as against infection.
And it's very light plastic. It's
yes, it is.
Not cumbersome at all.
Right.
It seems that most of what we've seen here is the woman's responsibility. It's still not much involvement from men in the contraceptive field.
Well, unfortunately, the methods are very much centered around, except for the condom, involving the woman using the method or getting the method prescribed to her. Hopefully men participate in the decision making, or at least in the encouragement, maybe for the cost as well. They help support the payment of it. And there are some methods that are coming maybe down the road that will be more centered around contraception for men themselves.
And what are they?
Well, there's a discussion about a vaccine, a sterility sort of vaccine, but it's a reversible type method, so that it would be for a year's time, and then after that time, if someone didn't have another injection or another implant, then they would resume their fertility as normal. But these are still under investigation. They're not available anywhere that I know of.
And this wouldn't in any way detriment, say, the quality of during sex, the quality of ejaculation?
Right. Well, that's certainly a focus, is to preserve the same sorts of things that people expect when they have intimate relations, and not to depress the sexual intimacy, the drive, or the pleasure that someone experiences. And I'm sure that they're going to test that carefully and not find it successful if it significantly affects it.
There are some methods available outside the U.S.
Yes.
that we can't get in the U.S. yet. Is that because they're waiting FDA approval?
That's right. Any method that is used in this country does have to be approved, and unfortunately, that's quite a long process to go through. There's a sponge that's being used in Canada, and you might remember there was a sponge available a while back in the U.S. called the Giudice sponge, but that was discontinued in 1995. And there's a sponge available now that's about $12, they said, for a package of 4, and women can put it in and leave it in for up to 12 hours. It doesn't have to be fit by a provider, so a woman can go to a pharmacy and get it and then use it at home and accomplish what she wants to as far as contraception that way.
There is some problem with accessibility, perhaps in some cases the cost, and age restrictions on certain contraceptions, are there?
I don't know of any laws that pertain to age restriction, although, as you're aware, probably certainly in certain schools and in certain communities, it's not considered acceptable to discuss contraception. it's a decision that people have to make as they have kids, certainly, about what information they will give to their children. And then if someone is going to have a method that's fairly involved, then they would need to go for an appointment to get, for example, contraceptive pills prescribed or a diaphragm fit. If you're talking about the most basic methods, you can go to a pharmacy and buy condoms, and those are fortunately available without any kind of age restriction, I think. So I think that people at least have those basic methods still accessible, even if their parents may not know that they're active or they're not very old yet.
So someone would come to, for instance, the Women's Health Center in Takoma, and what would the procedure be? They'd just talk with one of the nurses, is that?
They would set up an appointment. We'd go over a health history. We'd talk to them about what concerns they have, what they already know about, and what are they interested in, and definitely talk to them about prevention of infection, because it's so much a part of being sexually active, is not just to prevent pregnancy, but also be careful about your health as far as infections. And then make a prescription for them or fit them with a diaphragm, or they may discover that they're not really ready to be active yet, but they want to know what to do when they are ready, and that's good information to have ahead of time.
Thank you. And if all of these methods don't work, I mean, all of them have some kind of fault in that pregnancies do occur, which would you say is the safest one available now?
Well, I think that probably Depo-Provera has one of the best effectiveness rates, the one that's in the injection. Norplant certainly has a very good effectiveness rate. Those, unfortunately, have a few more side effects. So I would say among the more readily acceptable methods, the pill is probably up there near the top, and is a very good method for a lot of people. And the ones that are less effective, unfortunately, are sometimes the ones that leave people a little bit vulnerable to pregnancy.
Well, thank you very much. We've run out of time here.
Okay.
That's all we have time for on this show. A big thank you to Carolyn Dutcher for throwing light on a heavy subject. Until next time, in sickness and in health, I'm Cathy Kristiansen.
Coming right up, musical traditions. Bruce Hutton plays 3 instruments you may never even have seen before, let alone heard.
Oh, shoulder up your gun and call up your dog. Shoulder up your gun and call up your dog. Off to the woods to hunt groundhog. Old groundhog. You can eat up the meat, save the hide. Eat up the meat, save the hide. Make the best shoestrings ever been tied. Old groundhog. Now the meat's in the cupboard and the butter's in the shelf. Meat's in the cupboard and the butter's in the shelf. If you want any more, you can sing it yourself. Old groundhog. Well, you can eat up the meat, save the hide, make the best shoestrings ever been tied, or you can use that hide to make a banjo like this. I wish I was a mole in the ground. I wish I was a mole in the ground. If I was a mole in the ground, I'd root that mountain down. I wish I was a mole in the ground. I wish I was a lizard in the spring. I wish I was a lizard in the spring. If I was a lizard in the spring, I'd hear my darling sing. I wish I was a lizard in the spring.
Howdy, Bruce.
Hello, David.
I'd like to welcome everybody to another segment of Musical Traditions, and I'd especially like to welcome my old friend, Bruce Hutton.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Bruce, you have an interesting day job.
I do.
Tell me about it.
I cheat. You know, some musicians, some of the finest musicians have to have conventional day jobs in order to be able to do their musical love in the evenings, and I managed to do that in the day as well. I do a lot of daytime performances, perhaps more than my evening performances, although I have many of them as well.
So what we're talking about is right here in Montgomery County.
Montgomery County gives me a great opportunity to work close to home, although I travel quite a bit throughout the eastern part of the United States to school performances and do assembly concerts with instruments like this Groundhog hide banjo and the mouthbow that I started with.
Right, right. So you do a fair amount of school programs? A couple hundred a year, probably.
Well, there aren't quite that many days in the calendar to allow it, but I would say over 100 most years for the past 25 or so years.
Okay, and then you also do adult work as well.
Yeah.
Playing both audiences.
I make less distinction than some artists because I do the same kinds of folk songs for young folk as for older folk. The songs I do for young folk I would just as easily do for older folk. It doesn't always work the other way.
Right. The banjo you're playing is known as a fretless banjo.
This is yes, a Blue Ridge style made by the Glenn family down near Boone, North Carolina. Not really in Boone, but outside in the boonies.
Right. How far back have we traced the fretless banjo as, say, an American instrument?
Well, the very first banjos made by African Americans from gourds had fretless fingerboards, and this is probably the next step in the evolution of the banjo towards what people think of now with a more Western style drum. It does have a very small window in the back and a small window in the front, just as the gourd banjos would have had, but instead of being gourd shaped, it's more drum shaped.
Right. And the mouthbow is probably even earlier than that.
We believe, although no one was around to record it that's here today, that was the original stringed instrument known to man.
Yeah. Let's see, when you do a show, about how many instruments will you play on the average?
A little over a dozen in an hour show, and a bit fewer in a 40-minute show for the younger grades.
Sure. So we get not only expertise on the instrument, but you give the history, sort of where it ties into our culture. I mean, this is truly old-time music.
Well, an awful lot of Americans, even fans of the banjo, don't know that the roots of the banjo are African.
Yeah.
It's been called our most American instrument, and it might be, but it didn't start off being American.
Well, certainly we think of the guitar as a great old-time instrument.
Mm-hmm.
You could play a little guitar for us?
I will.
Okay. What's this tune called?
Well, a lot of the songs and instruments that I use are obscure. I like to introduce songs and instruments to audiences young and old. But this one is very well known to most audiences in the adult age, and I'm pleased to see that a lot of young people know it too. I was at Kimball Elementary School not long in Southeast Washington, and some students came up and said, "Our grandmother wrote that."
Wow.
And she did. Her name was Elizabeth Cotten.
That's amazing. Okay, I'm going to give you room to play it, and I'll be back at the end of the piece.
Freight train, run so fast. Freight train, run so fast. Please don't tell what train I'm on, so they won't know what route I'm gone. In her more than 90 years, Libba Cotten taught this song to audiences all over the world. When I die, Lord, bury me deep, way down on Old Chestnut Street, so I can see old number 9 as she goes a-rolling by. When my Piedmont pickin' goes rolling by just a bit, I'll try that chorus just one more time for Libba. Freight freight train, run. Oh, freight train, run. Now please don't say what train I'm on, so they won't know what route I'm gone.
So you met the grandkids, huh?
Yeah, I assume they were great-grandkids.
It would have to be, yeah.
And they might even be great-great-grandkids, because I remember when I saw her perform at the Smithsonian in the latter part of her life, there was an immense family of great-grandchildren already assembled then.
Well, as the summer wears on, we can look forward to the Takoma Park Folk Festival. I know that's both near and dear to both our hearts. This one is on 9/7/97, so we're calling it 97/97. It's the 20th year, and you'll be performing there. Probably,
as I did the first year.
That's right, 78, I believe. And we'll probably have you on the kids stage and maybe over in doing something for the adults as well.
Well, I've been known to do both at that festival, and actually my favorite audience is a combination of both, so I
the
hope
family
to have
concert.
some of the parents there with their kids. Don't just dump them off with me.
Right.
And bring them to the other set,
But
too.
it's free babysitting.
That's true. If there's anything too adult in the adult portion of the concert, they'll be too young to understand it.
Right,
So there's no
it'll be over their heads.
Right.
So let's see. What gigs do you have coming up, say, besides the folk festival? And
well, since this is August that we're airing, I have to set my clock ahead.
Yeah.
After the Takoma Folk Festival, the next opportunity to hear me in the general area will be at the Waterford Fair, which is held the first weekend of October. And for a number of years now, I've been performing there both as a solo act and with double-decker string band, and we'll be again there this coming fall.
Double-decker
first weekend in October.
Right. I have some double-decker on vinyl, as a matter of fact. That
dates us.
Yeah. How far back does that band go now?
We've been a band since 1977.
Yeah.
And if you have vinyl, you have two of our first LPs that are now sadly out of print. But we have a brand new disc which is much smaller and plays digitally.
Yeah, louder.
Came out this year.
Right.
On the Merrimack label.
And that one's titled?
Chasing Rainbows.
Okay.
A fine old song from the Dallas String Band is the title cut.
Merrimack's a pretty good label in that they do a lot of, let's say, more obscure styles that aren't in the mainstream, so to speak.
Well, the label has always prided itself in doing mostly old-time music, which means mostly string band music of the kind that Double Decker plays, but also other types of old-time such as blues, Cajun, things of the same time frame in roots.
Speaking of blues, you have a steel guitar down there.
I have an old-time guitar, which is a National Steel Resophonic.
Right. We were talking to the crew earlier about the words like dobro and National Steel, and I think after we got done telling them everything,
they were thoroughly confused.
Right. They were more confused than ever.
Well, it's a steel guitar if it has steel strings, or if you play it with steel picks, or if you play it with a steel bar.
Or if it happens to be made out of steel.
If it happens to be a pedal steel and you have no guitar at all, just pedals and strings. Or if it happens to have a steel body like this one, which is in fact made out of brass.
Right, but plated.
With
nickel on
with nickel, yeah.
About how far back was that one? You got a rough idea of the date on that?
I got it from the first owner, who told me he got it in the 30s.
Wow.
He was a teenager who was trying to impress a girlfriend that liked Hawaiian music. And so he saved for quite a long time to get a hold of this guitar. He said, I could have bought a Ford for the money I saved up for this. Of course, that was when Fords were less.
Right.
Then about a week after he saved up for the guitar and got it, he lost a girlfriend, never played it.
Kept the guitar.
Until I came along.
Right. Okay. Well, why don't you take us out with a blues?
I will, with a Robert Johnson number that, again, will be familiar to probably most of our listeners. Those that think John Belushi wrote it should know otherwise.
That's true. That's true. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
And everybody come out and see Bruce at the Takoma Park Folk Festival. Pick up the new recording. And if you got kids, tell the kids to come home and demand that the PTA brings them in.
One of my recordings is much more reasonable than inviting me into your home.
Thank you, Bruce.
I'm crying, oh, baby, don't you want to go? I'm crying, oh, baby, don't you want to go? Back to that land of California from my sweet home, Chicago. Now 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4. I'm heading on it, baby, ain't gonna stay here no more. I'm crying, oh, baby, don't you want to go? Back to that land of California from my sweet home, Chicago. Tell me how you feel on this guitar. Uh-huh. I hear you cry the blues in this guitar.
Stay tuned for Writer's Block. 2 eminent journalists discuss their recent book on how Washington politics really work, or don't, followed by Coffee House Forum. Topic: the automobile, with guest Mark Hertzgaard.